We're all here to talk with the artist of all this amazing work that we're sitting in the middle of right now, Esteban del Valle. Esteban is a Brooklyn, New York-based artist, originally from Chicago. He received his MFA from RISD and has exhibited work and produced murals internationally. His work has been featured in various publications, including High Fructose and the Washington Post. He has been the recipient of several visual artist residencies, including Skowhegan, the Fine Arts Work Center, Smack Mellon's Artist Studio Program, the Toby Devin Lewis Fellowship, and the Daniel F. Breeden Eminent Scholar Chair at Auburn University. He also has original work in several permanent collections, including the Urban Nation in Berlin, Germany, the Zimmerli Art Museum in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and the Provincetown Art Association and Museum in Provincetown, Massachusetts. In 2021, he received an inaugural commission from the Provincetown Public Art Foundation, and in 2024, he served as artist in residency at the University of Tennessee School of Art in Knoxville. He is a master draughtsman, a master marksman. Esteban del Valle, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Anthony, for being here with me. Anthony Venturini, everybody.
Boom, boom, boom.
Who is an actor, interdisciplinary artist, and we grew up together painting graffiti in Chicago. We went to high school together, and our graffiti careers took us into rap careers, in which we briefly started a record label and made our own music, made our own beats, performed live, booked shows, rap battled, did it all for a while. And then after that, I went into grad school and eventually started making short film projects, video art. Anthony worked with me in those, also was in those, while he was, I believe at that time, at Second City, doing improv, and went on to do IO in Chicago and do all those programs. And then eventually went to Steppenwolf, which is a very prestigious dramatic theater acting program residency. And then from there, now I moved to New York 14 years ago. You moved eight years ago, and continued to collaborate on things over time. I'm currently writing a play that I finished the first draft of that I pretty much wrote for him. And Anthony's film, How to Drag a Body, just had its international premiere
at Fantasia Film Festival in Montreal and the Sitges Film Festival in Spain. Basically, thank you. What it is Esteban and I have been making a lot of work and talking about art for many, many years. And I think that probably a little bit of what we're going to talk about today is just that identity of just being like a sensitive little monster trying to like figure out your way and your language in this world with like tools like visual art or dance or archery or whatever, photography at your disposal. So if it's all right with you, jump right in. So I just kind of want to jump right in. The exhibition title, Thanks for All the Conditional Love, you write about how abundance paradoxically erodes our capacity for survival and self-understanding. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what conditional love means in your work.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand it myself. The title comes from mixed places. Like a lot of my work is inspired by language first. So titles come to me from literature, from poetry, from music, from film, from conversations, and then the titles kind of sit in my head and then maybe generate an image, and then the image goes from there. So in this case, sometimes it goes the other way around, where a piece, an image will generate a title, but then that title then generates a body of work from there, which my last show with Russell was called A Little Something More. And that premise became the framework for every piece, because you see the work is like largely narrative, it's figure-based, and I am constantly making out of like more of a storyteller perspective. So the Thanks for All the Conditional Love kind of came from this piece with the butterflies. That's the actual title. And it kind of embodies this whole role of the artist and vulnerability, which was, I have a friend in New York who grew up in New York. And one day we were just casually talking about how there was a period of time in New York where flashers were very common, like people just showing you their naked body, mostly men. And, there still is public nudity in New York for different reasons, but like that whole kind of classic thing of the guy with the trench coat, like flashing people, he said growing up, he was like, I used to see it all the time when I was on the train. And he's like, and then it just kind of stopped one day. We don't know if it was like broken windows or what had happened during that time period. But he said he was on a train once going uptown, and this like very large man got on in this trench coat, went to the front of the train, and just looked away and opened up his coat, and the whole train, like during rush hour, just like freaked out. They're like nasty, and they all like got off the train that next stop. But Gio stayed on, and Gio said that he was looking and he couldn't look away from this guy. And he noticed that the guy had this very, very big, like aggressive scar over his stomach. And the guy would never looked at Gio. He just kept looking away and he had, kept his trench coat open. I feel like that's what art making is. Like it's this absolute exposure moment of vulnerability in which you look away because you like can't, like you just need to share, you need to be seen, but you're not willing, or it's almost too much to like embrace that moment of being seen, so you look away. And that's kind of what we do when we like install these shows and just leave, right? Or I put all these feelings and these thoughts into these pieces, and then they just exist on their own. And the second part of that story was a documentary about chimpanzees called Chimp Empire. And it's, you watch these documentaries about how chimpanzees behave, and they're so human-like, and they have these territorial wars. And I believe the highest concentration of them is, I think, in Uganda. And they were following the biggest chimp camp, and they were patrolling and marking their territory, and their rivals, which was a smaller group, was there doing the same thing. And you see these social functions in the chimps, and how these chimps have to find their role, and if they don't, then they end up dead, and they either end up having like kind of ousted from the group, or they can't survive because they can't find a mate or whatever. But it's all a social component, and all of that relies on how they can fit into the social fabric, which is a hierarchy of people. And again, well, what happens is there's one chimp they follow who kind of doesn't quite fit into the group. He leaves the patrol early, and then the documentarian and the chimps find his body because he was killed by the rival group. And when they find his body, he's absolutely covered in these beautiful, colorful moths and butterflies. And that image stayed with me. And so this figure is a mixture of that flasher and chimp, which is like the stand-in for the artist as somebody who's constantly struggling to fit within the fabric of the social structure. And I think the concept of all the conditional love is, the phrase is thanks for all the conditional love, which is inherently like a sarcastic comment, but there's also a sincerity to it. But it comes from that feeling of like, well, I mean, we're here, right? I made the work. Like, we're looking at it, we're talking about it, and I wouldn't be making it if I didn't feel the love of making, and people wouldn't be coming to galleries if there wasn't some caring for art. But so there's kind of this humor and bitterness, but gratitude at the same time, that I feel like is that kind of paradox of excess means less prepared in some way. Does that?
Yeah, but so I guess so. Like then, like let's stick with this image of the flasher because it's wildly disturbing, and I'm so glad that doesn't happen in New York anymore. But I guess like then in terms of the art making, like is the condition then like the response to the flasher, or the fact that like, or is this like late, are we talking about like late stage capitalism, like that condition of like, Art Basel's happening right now, like that's a great way for some artists to showcase their work and have a bunch of billionaires buy all their work and be like, I'm a real artist or whatever. Like, does some of that title like live in that space of thinking? Or
the late stage capitalism part, I think, is about that difficulty of finding relationships. Like, we had a long conversation from the visiting artist for 20 summers here about how AI and media make it. The whole show started with that piece, but it was spurred on by an essay I read in undergrad that stayed with me. Karl Marx, Four Forms of Alienation, like the breakdown of the four types of alienation that occur under capital production. It's like alienation from labor, alienation from product, alienation from self, alienation from, I think, other, can't remember the exact ones, but basically it's these stages in which this system that exists results in being alienated from the very things you're making, from the very people you're making it with, and so on. And then, but in the context of the love, we have in English the word love, and you you can have infatuation, you could have other words, desire, but like love is a singular word. And the Greeks had 7 or 8 words for love, for the different types of words, different types of love you can experience, like love for God, love for family, love, romantic love, sexual love, like. And so the idea of like this alienation and that vast different ways that love can stand in, I feel like are the complicated natures of systems that of our relationships as they come out of these capitalist spaces. So it's like Art Basel is constantly a thing, you know, people make fun of in the art world, but it's more complicated than that. Like everything's more complicated than that. And I think the love can be the thanks for all the conditional love is kind of, yeah, it's like a career satire, but it's also a personal plea, like the irony of it. Of like, I think the flasher concept is like, I think for me, like every single one of these is me being the flasher.
Yeah.
And my work is very, very personal, and for me, very vulnerable. I don't care if the audience knows everything about it, but when I go into the stories that inspire the pieces, such as that one, are really very deeply personal and about me. Like this piece is of Stephanie's office. This is my partner right there, and you know, she experienced this piece hanging in our room once it was finished, because my studio's at home, and big work, we only have 2 walls in the house. One is our bedroom and one is her office. So I finish these big ass paintings, and then Stephanie has to live with them. You know, this is her office, and she just started a new job, and we were talking about like these kind of remote working circumstances and the alienation that occurs within that space. And she was looking at the piece, and she was like, this made me very emotional, and like deeply reflect on my own life. And I said, like, yeah, that part of it is like a critique of the thing that my partner is.
Yeah.
But like, then there's work like that that's a critique of me and my role within the art world, and the kind of hypocrisy that we all live within. And that's where the hypocrisy of like conditional love is hypocritical, right? Like, is it possible to have conditional love, or is love just absolute as a concept, period?
Cool. Yeah, thank you. I feel like that piece and the one around the corner that is the blue studio, but I'm talking about the same kind of work, the same style, so people can recognize it and don't get confused. You know, then once you're famous, airborne, you know, you got to keep doing it in the same way, even after it's boring, unless you want people to really get mad at you, which they will all anyways. That's the name of the piece. I feel like those 2 pieces really talk, like, to me, when I saw them, are talking about the same thing, and the same thing that, you know, we've talked about a lot, My partner here is also named Stephanie and an actor. And especially just in this space and in this world right now, like that piece made me really emotional, because I'm just like, you know, like you give your everything until you have like nothing left, and you're like this dude who's just like collapsed on the beach, kind of like decaying back into nature. A lot of that really makes sense. Thank you for sharing. You seen the new Frankenstein movie?
Yes, I have.
Might be some spoilers here for anyone who hasn't seen the new Frankenstein movie. The new Frankenstein movie just came out. In it, this creature is desperately seeking recognition and home from a world that's terrified of him, and a creator who's abandoned him. Your exhibition asks, what does survival look like in a culture estranged from the very relationships that sustain life? What remains but hollow desire and the urge to place it somewhere, to name love and to build it a home, only to realize we may no longer recognize what either one looks like. In your paintings and drawings, again, I'm this painting behind you, this one, there's the blue one around the corner with the really long name. And a lot of your work, like, again, that I've seen throughout the years, there's a lot of these domestic spaces like bars, restaurants, bedrooms, diners, offices, but they often feel haunted by absence or exhaustion rather than finding sanctuary in them. So I was wondering, do you think that your figures are searching for a home or mourning one?
Great question. Very beautiful.
Like Frankenstein.
Yeah. Well, the reason why that was so funny is we had a long conversation about Frankenstein already when it came out, because we were both Guillermo del Toro fans, but for different reasons, I feel. But the it's a really great question, and I think the domestic spaces, it's important for people to know. Not, I think you can kind of get it. It's like they're my spaces. This is the diner me and Stephanie go to almost every weekend, and it's just one of our routines. And this piece was inspired. It's called Sunnyside. It's, walking distance, and it's kind of like the one, because we work so much. We both work from home. We're two rooms in the same house. Because we work so much, it's sometimes like it's only when we go to diner that we actually get to talk, and that diner has two TVs on it, and it also, I now call it the Blade Diner, because they're always playing that like music from the nightclub scene in Blade.
Really?
Like,
Why?
so you're eating. They just started, and it's ruined it for me. I'm like, we have to find a new diner because I can't think in there. It's like, and you're just trying to eat your eggs. But maybe it's in response to what I was experiencing before that, which was the TV here, TV there, and it's just like the world's on fire. Trump did this again. It's burning, ice, and you're like, I just want to have breakfast. And so there's this feeling like originally I had planned to have this piece have an e-bike on fire in the window. And I just decided it didn't need it because it was like the painting was that. It was the e-bike on fire. It was the idea that like the world's on fire, but you're still having this. Like, and the other thing is these pieces there's two pieces from this series that aren't in the show because they already found homes from other things. One's called Another Event, which is like this like wedding quinceañera type scene of me and Stephanie embracing, but it's not. So these characters are us, but not us. Sometimes they're more us, sometimes they're less us. Anthony's been in several of my paintings and drawings, and sometimes I don't think I've ever used you as you, but I use us more like us. And I think that the domestic spaces being Stephanie's office, that drawing the Blue Studio is based on my very first Brooklyn apartment, which was a room in a basement that wasn't supposed to be residential. So the wall was like Count of Monte Cristo stone that had been lacquered to keep the moisture out. And I had a tiny window. Roy,
I remember that.
Oh, yeah, you can. I had a tiny window that looked out into a grate, and so it was just where people shoved garbage, and so I couldn't open it because it would just be like potato chip bags blowing in and stuff like that. And of course, but I had a nice studio upstairs, and it was my first New York experience. And there was this so these are based on my like real life spaces, and I think in real life, many of you, we've talked about we're trying to move to Maine. And if you've known me longer, like these guys, you would know that I've been trying to move somewhere for many years. Like, and I'll leave to this place for a year and I come back. So don't worry, David. Because it's like, I can't ever quite find myself. I am a person of extremes, and it's like, it's all or nothing. And I have now kind of, as I've gotten older, realized that manifests in the way I need to live as well. It's like, it needs to be in a dead town in the middle of winter where nobody's there, and then I need to go back to New York and be there. So I think there's a certain restlessness and the need of home that maybe you're responding to, which I never thought of. But I think why I don't think about it, and it goes back to love, is because I really do find my home with the people I love. So like with Stephanie and with you and Roy and my friends that, I'm very lucky that I have friends from childhood from Chicago that, I've had shows in how many different cities, and they've been at those openings. And I had an opening, and we were talking about this last night. I had an opening in Berlin, and Roy was there. And then Stephanie, we were packing up the car, doing this all over again, and we're thinking about how many times have we done this. So there is this like restlessness and this lack of home. But then I think the figurative focus on the people that I choose to represent, I think, has to do with the fact that is where the love goes, is like into the person, I guess.
And so what about like even you just said about the diner, or like now that they're playing techno music, you got to find a new diner. And myself, I'm prone to like languishing in the dramatics, but for you, does that feel like mourning that was our diner, like that was our space, damn, now we got to get a new fucking diner?
I mean, I get a little mad when I'm there still
Yeah.
eating, and I'm like, oh, I gotta find a new place, and
Yeah.
I'm mad in that moment. But we are different in that way.
Yeah.
Like once it's gone, it's gone. Like
Yeah.
and that's why it's always been easier for me to kind of just move to another place,
Mhm.
reestablish something, and then leave there. But you know, I think to the Frankenstein thing, I'm thinking about there is if spoiler alert.
Yeah. He's a monster.
Yeah. There's a scene at the end of Frankenstein, very end,
Ugh.
where the monster
Ugh.
is
Ugh.
getting the sun on his face, and it's a beautiful moment. But then he sheds a single tear, and I was like, "Fuck you, Guillermo del Toro! I was on your side
Right,
until that
yeah.
moment." Because if you know me, you also know I'm very outraged. Martin Scorsese is one of my favorite directors, and I'm outraged by the rat that comes out at the end of The Departed.
Right.
Because you're like,
garbage.
It's a hat on a hat on a hat.
Yeah.
But what's funny is I also identify with those two directors as storytellers, especially Guillermo del Toro, because there is an extreme romanticness to his work.
Mhm.
And I think I have the same thing
Mhm.
because it's my disposition. I think one of the critiques that I would get for things historically is that, you know, there's either a space where they see it as didactic, or it's like, when I was political work, it was didactic or more preachy, but the literalization of certain things, and then the figurative stylization as well. It's like, well, are these comic book drawings, or these graffiti? Is it like the kind of stylist, like contemporary painting has a lot of stylization, but it's often based in like some type of performance of de-skilling. So it's supposed to look a little bad or a little off, and that's stylization to me. But they don't talk about it like that. But as soon as you do thing that seems like stylized, like aesthetically to a point of like coolness or like comic or graffiti, then it gets to the critique of stylization. But I think that is where like I feel the kinship with directors like Guillermo del Toro, who chose like the monster genre as a way to talk about love stories, you know. And like I remember reading this essay, I think it might have been Dave Hickey, is like, you know, about like how many love songs we have. Like that's pretty much all songs. And he's like, you might not like every love song, but everybody has a love song they like, you know? And so there's something about, I've always been very interested in that cliche and that romantic as like skeletal structure, the same way Guillermo del Toro is like, I take the cliche as the beginning entry point because it's a storytelling narrative structure. And then through there, I try to implement as much personal and vulnerability. And then a lot of painting, there's like a lot of painting art historical conversation for me. It's not important. I was talking about David Caspar Friedrich's painting, which I can never remember, but it's like one of the first major romantic paintings of this guy standing. He's like a, you know, bourgeoisie guy standing at the edge of a cliff looking off into the fog, and it's very like manifest destiny, move west. Like that's where that composition comes from for me. And like, you know, Dutch still lifes, and that is the reclining figure, like Olympia, Manet. Like I'm definitely thinking about these art historical references and ways of contemporizing. Like, where do you see a reclining woman in the world in a traditional pose? It's like maybe the airport sleeping on a bench, right? And like, and then the stylization to go into that way where it's like she might not be in that specific pose. She'd probably be in a more awkward one, maybe a jacket over her head. But it's like where I then make those choices, like Guillermo del Toro, to stylize it a little bit more, is to make you then make that art historical assumption. Otherwise, it would just be a representation of somebody sleeping in an airport.
Yeah.
Right? Like
a representation of a monster with feelings that cries a single tear.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. I'm going to ask one more question and then open up to you all for any questions as well. Just switching finally to technique, and this is like a personal curiosity of mine that I've had for a while that I don't think I've ever asked you. But throughout your work and murals, even your murals, a lot of your studio work, the last several exhibitions of yours that I've seen, there's this consistent visual approach, and I think it's very apparent in Thanks for the Conditional Love, but honestly, all the pieces in this room, maybe not so much the airport one, but this consistent style of like the images not like looking like shapes and motions and like this kind of kinetic energy, fragmentation, shapes, layers, to where like when you look at it long enough, then the image starts to reveal itself. And I know that we have talked about like before that has been a focus of yours. You're like, I want that. That's what I'm aiming for. And my question is, why?
because painting is still and it's a looking experience. And I, similar to like, can't help but be a person that wants to live in these two extremes. Always, I like. I wish I didn't like painting and drawing as much as I do. I wish I liked something that was made more sense in the
Finance.
world, like finance, law, like
Law.
yeah, engineering, something like
AI,
that. Yeah,
whatever. I don't know.
but I mean, but I'm being sarcastic, of course. I do love it, but there is this like I find myself really drawn to film, and that's hence the play, and I aspire to make a very involved animation. That's the reason to move to Maine, is to spend a couple of years working on an animation project and finishing the play. And because I think seeing time-based things creates another space for the experience. And I keep thinking about how like many painters, a painting might stay with you, an artist, a painting might stay with you for your whole life. But again, like how many songs are in your head, how many films are in your head. And I like the idea of like being in somebody's memory in that way with an artwork. And so the idea was, drawing is my love. Like I say painting, but I'm not a painter. But I just realized that like 5 years ago. I was like, oh, I'm a drawer. I've always been like, I'm a terrible painter. I can't figure out color. Russell will attest to that with a few pieces, I think. He really likes the monochromatic washed stuff, which is like more towards the drawing side. And I do feel like I have a strength of drawing because it's something I'm very in love with, and it's something I've put a lot of time in. But so these pieces begin with this whole drawing process that nobody even sees, which is a quick little thumbnail as an idea that looks like a crude sketch, and then a lot of words next to it that says maybe like, this guy has a gray hat. And you look at the scribble, and it's just like, it's just a scribble. So I have to write what it was. Yeah. And then I take my own reference photos. So I'll call up Anthony or get Stephanie and be like, okay, we're good. And like I actually boiled boots. Yeah. And I bought a comical pot from a restaurant store, and I made boot soup, and I photographed it. And then I photographed it. But then that stove is a stove from one of our apartments. The countertop's another apartment. The background, that sign is my auntie Alice's sign. Her house is filled with like these Jesus live, love, laugh signs. So that's the other thing I forgot to say, is like the two paintings I started talking about, that other painting, another event, and the other one's called 4 o'clock Naked and Afraid in Miami. They all have like breadcrumbs into each other. So like those signs occur in there, and that guy's making those signs, and that font exists on the wedding paraphernalia in the other one. And on and on. Like that shirt is the shirt being worn in Blue Studio. And like, so they all have these breadcrumbs into each other, which is another way of me trying to create like a time-based experience in a still image, is that there is this narrative between the pieces as well. But the drawing, from the photos I take, I make collages, digital collages. So it's just the same as a collage with scissors, but I just do it in Photoshop. And sometimes I'm really tight with cutting them out. Sometimes I'm just kind of like, oh, I might use this, so let me not spend too much time cutting it out exact. And then I play with these collages, and I make these full compositions. And then I take that, and then I do a sketch of that. And so collage is another form of drawing, and I use a next level, another drawing mediation of the collage, and I see the collage as a new picture. So that's where you get a lot of the fragmentation that occurs, like these chunks of space. But then the drawing itself is something that I'm not good enough to like nail it right away, and I might change my mind. So I leave those marks as I change things, and then that adds another level of fragmentation. So I then treat that, I'll paint that negative space. Like you can see his pants, some of that is byproduct of like 3 different pants I picked from the collage. And then some of it is a byproduct of lines that maybe came as I was trying to figure out the bend of his knee. But they all then get treated as another kind of space that I am seeing as its own thing. So then the fragmentation, as Anthony is saying, the goal is that some of them are more dense than others, in which, like, people were telling me yesterday they didn't notice the figure in the foreground yet. Yeah. The idea is that it comes from being inspired by Van Gogh. And Van Gogh's paintings, his brushstrokes, which you'll notice that somebody pointed out to me, is like, oh, you don't have brushstrokes in your work. Because these are more like watercolors, because I'm working on raw canvas. So I mix paint with water, and it absorbs into into the canvas. But the idea of Van Gogh's brushstrokes, like we talked before extensively about mirror neurons, being neurologically hardwired to extend empathy into the world. So if you see a spider crawling up somebody's arm, you might get the willies, right? Like, and we're made that way. And the mirror neurons, I kind of speculate that that's one of the reasons I think people love Van Gogh's work so much, is to be able to see the brushstrokes. You empathize into the making process, and it's almost like you construct the image with him. So I take that both within constructing the image and constructing the narrative. I like to break things down enough that you might find an anchor point, and then a hand comes into focus and you go, oh, that's a dude sitting there. Yeah. Oh, they're in that space. Oh, this is what's happening. And therefore you build the narrative, and it's a way of giving you a time-based experience of a narrative thing in a still image.
Cool. And is that so that's kind of your brushstrokes then, are like seeing the collage,
the fracturing, yeah, maybe, yeah.
Is that the same thing of like because you also talked about, again, I'm just gonna, I think that's like the most apparent example, like how the robe disappears into the sand and you kind of don't know which one's which or where one starts or where one begins. Is that kind of the same idea of seeing like brushstrokes, or is that like, I don't know, something more about like moving or losing yourself in the marks or the painting or things like that?
It's all of those things, and and especially about movement, like you see his hand kind of blurring. Like, there's this idea, if you look at his body, you'll see the format of his body is like a butterfly. So his shape is like, is he dead? Is he sleeping? Is he passed out? Is he transforming? Because within that act of flashing, if you're doing it intentionally, are you doing so to like push yourself into the next space of being in some way? And so I think the cinematic and the movement is like something that has stayed from my work from back in graffiti days. You remember when I used to do pieces and everybody like, I can't, like the initial sketch was so crazy. Everybody was always like, how do you see your letters? But because I would keep changing, moving things, and then all those lines would add up and add up. And I think it still stays into this painting. And I think that is my literal movement. Like, I'm moving the pencil, I'm moving the box. And so then there is that movement is communicated as like a type of motion in a still image.
Beautiful. Great. Well, I think we have time to open up for any questions. If anybody got any questions?
Yes.
Thank you so much. And sorry, you might have answered before, I came late. But I'm curious, when you describe the drawing process, is that on like to scale, or is that on a smaller? Is that on the canvas, or is that something that you later either project or transfer in another way?
Oh yeah, I understand. No, so the collage is digital, so then I have that on an iPad or printed out, and then the sketch happens for the first time on the canvas.
Okay.
So like, I work on all these canvases initially stretched to a wall because I use drawing mediums, so I want the resistance of the wall, and they don't get stretched on the stretchers until they're pretty much like done. And I used to use more transfer techniques, like say a grid, because I was a professional muralist for a long time, so I still am, but like, it was more of a profession, and we use the grid all the time to scale things up. So I used to do grid, I used to do projection and all that stuff. But I found, once I embraced the drawing aspect, I realized more and more that my hand was important. And the things that I would like, if I do architecture, I'm like, I don't want to draw all these little windows or whatever. So sometimes I'll do a little bit of a cheat with that. But the big thing is that if I just transfer a projection, for me, then it's like, oh, that's something anybody could have done. But I usually want to do that because it's so hard for me to draw, say, like a cat, right?
It's a great looking cat.
But I cheated a little bit on that cat.
I mean, that's pretty good.
But like, this plant was a nightmare. And the mistakes that I made that would make me want to use a projection are like what then make the drawing feel like it's moving or feel better to me. So I stopped using all those techniques, and I just go. And when I do murals, it's even more of a crazy scale up, because I'll have the collage and then I do the drawing. Like, there is no sketch. The drawing just happens for the first time, like 10, 15 feet tall by whatever. And then that's where all that energy comes from too.
You kind of erase or hide? Because if your material is translucent, you don't see any
Yeah.
pencil marks or things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, some of the you'll see like some of like this floor right here, like that's the original sketch underneath the wash, and you can see some of the pastel shining through in areas. But there will be areas that I do choose to selectively edit, like the height of that kind of bright yellow burst. I had to use more spray paint because there was like a nasty little like drawn mark that just wasn't working.
Oh, so you use stencils.
Sorry, I can't help you with that on iPhone.
Siri can't help either. So.
I don't. Somebody asked about stencils too. Uh, I the only time I use a stencil is like I use contact paper, and it might be to like that iPhone, the glow of the phone.
Protect.
Yeah, to protect. But other than that, like all the geometric stuff is just like hand painted carefully. And then the spray paint that I use on a lot of stuff, especially more obvious in the smaller drawings. Somebody asked me about this yesterday. Those three small drawings, they have this like kind of texture and atmosphere to them. That came out of a studio accident where I used to do these very realistic marker drawings, like illustrations, and I had this idea because I was really at the time I was really obsessing about Vermeer. And Vermeer has like I feel like Van Gogh gives like rhythm to air, and Vermeer gives like volume to air, and so I always feel like, well, I can't paint like that. How could I cheat and try to figure it out? So I started using spray paint to create like an atmosphere, and I work at home and I have terrible lighting. So one day I did that, and then I took it out, and I was like, "Oh, you just covered your like 30-hour drawing in spray paint, and you could barely see it." So thankfully I use a very heavy stock paper. So I was like, "Well, what's the worst that could happen? Maybe I could try to sand it back." And I sanded it a bunch, and then what was left was this really cool ghost image, and it wasn't quite there yet. But I was like, "Well, what if I draw on top of that?" And that's what started this whole process that I use there. So those begin with either watercolors or something, then spray paint, then sanding, and then color pencil on top of them as a way of getting back the form. But because I use the spray paint in the way I do, and the acrylic as the way I do sometimes, like those acrylic pours, is I use them as obstacles to prevent me from drawing too well. Like, because I will have a tendency to want to like represent something very like that's as far as I can like render that figure with the ground that's on there. Like you can't get it without painting over it completely, you know.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question. I feel like you
What time is
mentioned
it?
We're good.
a lot of films. Were you thinking of any films during the creation of these pieces? Yeah, like were any of them influencing you?
There is this really beautiful film I saw. I can't remember the name of it. It was a Spanish film, and it was about a trans woman who falls in love with this older man, and they had this really beautiful relationship. And he falls down the stairs while he's having like a heart attack or something, and he dies. I think he dies, and like so their romance kind of gets more public within his family, and they end up thinking they're like, you killed him, like because he was a little more well off, and they think that she did it, and it's not like a thriller, it's just like this really sad drama about this, and they had such a beautiful like love connection. And there's this beautiful scene they have before all the drama happens where they're dancing in this club, and there's these beautiful like purple lights on them, and I have those stills on my phone, and I just came across when I was deleting to make space for this, and I was re-looking at those because that was what inspired the palette for another event. And another event was this wedding quinceañera graduation party scene, but it was alluding towards there's little hints that like there might have been a disaster that happened, and this couple is just, and that's what you had mentioned, and it was out of my statement, I think, but originally the statement was based on this kind of idea of alienation, Marx's alienation, um, Greek 7 different words for love, and then contemporary American exhaustion. Mm-hmm. And the idea was exhaustion of like, oh, you think you're exhausted? Like, what about people in Gaza? But there, so it was more of like similar. Thanks for all the conditional love. It's like, what does exhaustion look like to us in this privileged space of excess and access? And so that film started a lot of it because of that tender moment of love and that just palette and that scene where they're dancing. It's just like really beautiful, soft moment. But there's so much politics into this relationship, and then you see that play out in real time in their personal lives. And I watched, I was saying a movie again, can't remember the name of it. I just threw it on. It was the young like badass girl from the Ozarks who's like,
Oh yeah,
what's her name?
Julia Garner.
Julie Gardner.
Yeah.
She's in a movie that's like a Me Too story where she's the secretary.
I think it's called. Is it called The Secretary or
Something
or
like
the
that.
assistant
The
or something?
Assistant.
Yeah.
I didn't know what that
yeah.
movie was on. It just kind of auto played while I was working.
Fun autoplay.
And I
Jeez.
ended up,
Yeah, like-
I ended up really getting like I was really impressed by it as a film because part of it was that it was just about the ordinariness of her day to day life while this like terrible thing is happening in this world. But you never see it, you never know. And so there are films like that, and me thinking about a lot of this is like back to Guillermo del Toro, and I was thinking about Pan's Labyrinth and how Pan's Labyrinth takes this like super fantasy romantic approach to this story, and people are like, oh, it's about fascism, and it is, but it's also about a little girl who doesn't like her new stepfather.
Yeah.
And there's something very ordinary about that, where all these big politics. So I'm often trying to Guillermo del Toro my life, if you will. Like I'm taking these like personal, just ordinary moments, and then making them like more fantastical and epic than they are.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have one more time for one
we
more?
have time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved hearing about the different media you worked with over time, and then also getting inspiration from other media as well. And also loved hearing that even like a few years ago, you realized I'm not a painter, or like I am a painter, but I'm not a professional drawer. And I'm curious what the evolution was like to figuring out that you wanted to work like this on canvas.
Yeah.
Are you really thinking a more traditional medium, and was that something that college affected, or where did that kind of
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I mean, that's a like a longer like talk, but I'll try to skim up because I've also like made film. Like I left grad school and got the classic story of like got rejected from a residency in which like a mentor was probably the person that rejected me, and I realized, oh, like my work looks too much like my influences. And there's this story about Chuck Close, who said the only person that painted more de Koonings than de Kooning was him. And that was him in grad school. So he got rid of all the tools that would allow him to paint like de Kooning. And that's when he started doing the airbrush stuff in grad school, the realistic ones before he had his like injury. And I took that story and I was like, well, I got to get rid of all the tools that make me work like my professor. So I started making video and film, and I did like performance stuff for a while. And then I have this great way, Russell will love this great way of sabotaging my career all the time. So people are like, I like this. And I'm like, fuck you. Right, Russell? So then I go in a completely different direction. So the video work was getting some traction, and I was like, now it's time to make drawings nobody likes for a little while until they like them, and then I'll change again and write a play. So but the thing that followed through all those mediums, which I didn't realize until like 5 years ago, was this drawing element. Like I was doing video and film, video art, but I was hand painting the sets, and then I was making costumes, but they were really like collages on sculptures. And then I would make sculptures, but they were really like 3D collages. And so when I realized that, when I realized that drawing thing, it kind of opened things up, and it gave me a focus into how to approach every medium. So when I do painting, I was like, because I hate painting, how do I make painting more like drawing? So that's why I started working with raw canvas, was because it's absorbent and it treats more like watercolor, and it has this, like paper, it absorbs, and like paper, there's an intimacy to that absorption. Like for me, it feels like I am having it forces you to slow down. Like these paintings take a long time. And that's just most of its drying time. Like it's like little. And what I realized too is pretty much all of these are like mostly painted with a very tiny brush. Like there's one brush I'm using for everything, and then I'm blow drying, and then I'm blow drying, and then this, and then it's hard to work the whole as much as I would like, because whenever I jump ahead of myself, then I make like bad decisions. It's kind of like I have to work in these kind of whole. And so the mediums kind of have also dictated like, well, you can't work this way, so you have to adjust a little bit. So then I'd think, well, how do I adjust that like a drawing instead of a painting? So they are evolution and of everything. Like the graffiti, as I was talking about, the way I used to sketch my letters then became the way I painted these live paintings I used to do that I would do at music events. And the idea was I only had 3-4 hours to do a painting on stage, drinking beers to like a punk band or hip hop set. And I started using markers because that's what we used to tag with. And then I switched to shoe polish because that's what we used to tag with, like shoe polish on a stick. And then eventually I did oil that only lasted for a little bit because it was a terrible idea to paint an oil painting in a bar. And then I kind of developed like, oh, I'm going to use like a diluted black acrylic and do line drawing. And then that's why I was like, oh, now I can't correct if everything's drawn in black. And then I would start with these abstractions, and that was something I was just doing for fun. And then now years later, you see it's kind of like that's what these are, just minus the black line. Like they're the same approach, but they're not just all outlines. So the whole thing just keeps evolving. Did that answer?
Yeah,
Okay.
Cool.
That's
Can
it.
I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I want to kind of go back to what you were talking about, the sort of stylized critique earlier about sort of approaches of making, and I kind of see the title of the blue one and these two as sort of that departed wrath moment. And is that for you like a friction that you embrace? Is that something that you're trying to resist against, or are you playing ironically with it? How do you feel about that?
Great question.
I think I don't know. I'm playing with it. I don't know if ironic, like when you ask it that way, I'm guessing maybe I have more compassion for Martin Scorsese then. I'm like, okay, like
No.
because the outsider always has this opinion, right? But then there is this thing that all artists struggle with, where if you're like too close to your work, you're like, I'm killing it, this is a great idea, and everybody else doesn't get it, and then you're like heartbroken. You're like, but you don't get it. But there is this negotiation between, well, how does the audience read it and how do you read it? So I think in that one, the title, like kind of driving it home, is for people to, like, similar to the reclining figure, to absolutely make that connection, that is the scene from the Basquiat movie in which Benny tells Basquiat how to become famous. And the idea is the redundancy of producing the same type of work so that you're in some way a brand, but we as art world people don't. Like certain people admit that, other people just kind of disguise it in art speak, like this is a series and we would like you to do more of the blue series or whatever, But the idea is like, how is that different than live, love, laugh signs if you're just cranking them out, right? But then I'm a big fan of Dogs Playing Poker painting. I've written a huge essay about it. And the idea is that like somebody has that live, love, laugh sign in their house, like my aunt, and it gives her motivation when she wakes up in the morning. And she has all these signs that are reminders for her that fill a space of love. And we can look at that and be like, that's kitschy, that's garbage. But then I see a painter do 16 of the same paintings, and then the next show is the same thing. And regardless of the success, it really depends on whether that artist, like Mondrian or Morandi, like Morandi painted the same bottles forever, and those paintings are gorgeous. So like it just depends on the sentiment behind it. So I think sometimes, Yunsu, like sometimes that heavy-handedness for me is definitely to call attention to that conversation. I think that's why maybe sometimes I get frustrated that people think that that's all it is, instead of realizing, well, don't you think somebody with an MFA from RISD that went to Skowhegan that did all this has been in the rooms where people say like, well, this is illustrative, or this is what, so it's like, well, then take one more step and think more as to why I might be putting this in the context of the same art world that I've been in having those conversations for years.
Nice. Yeah, I had a director once when I was like tearing apart a play that we were reading, and I was like, ooh, I'm so killing, I'm so smart. And he was like, Anthony, you think that I went through all these readings and all this development, and you're the one to figure out all these loopholes or whatever, all these problems with it? And I was like, okay, fine. Well, thank you so much to the LaMontagne Gallery again for having us. Thank you so much to Esteban del Valle. It shows up for how much longer? Until January 17th.
Bring your friends, your family.
Bring everyone you know. Kids get in for free.
Thank you.